Hey everybody, welcome back to a Sessionable Saturday. I am your host, Greg Avola, founder of Untapped. Hope that you're enjoying your weekend. It's 2:30 Eastern over on our side. It's 90 degrees outside. So hopefully you're enjoying with a nice beverage. And we got a great guest lined up today. And I'm going to add him to the screen right now. Phil, which is a brewmaster at Brewery Ommegang. Phil, thanks for being part of the show.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Awesome. Very cool. We got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about, what's going on with Brewery Ommegang, some of the cool stuff you've been doing. But like every other virtual happy hour or Sessionable Saturday, it's all about the beverage that you are drinking. So, Phil, what do you got in your glass for this particular session today?
Right now, I have an Idle Days Pilsner. Perfect day
Awesome.
for that. Hot, humid, nice, refreshing, crisp beer.
Awesome. Well, I have the same thing as well on my screen
Great.
here, the Idle Hands Pilsner. No, I've had a lot of brew.
Idle Days.
Idle Days, not at hands. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I've had a lot of the stuff that you've been able to brew, but I've never had this one before. Is this a newer beer that you guys have released, or something that's been in the pipers for a little while?
Well, we've been developing it for a while, but it's relatively new. We first brewed it about a year ago. We just went into wider distribution this year.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Well, if you got your beer out there right now that you're watching, crack it open and make sure you check into your beer on Untapped and use the venue Untapped at Home. It's a great way to keep track of what you're drinking when you're at home in this pandemic, and also see what your friends are all over the place. So I've got my glass here. I've got a little bit of a head, so that's all good. And cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your beverage.
Prost.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot into lagers and pilsners recently, getting back to the original styles of beer. I mean, I like hazy IPAs like everybody else, but in an environment like this where it's so hot outside, this beverage is perfect, for like mowing the lawn or just kind of enjoying it. Very crisp and very drinkable. So great job with this beer.
All right, thank you. Yeah, enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it, Phil. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up at Brewery Ommegang, and a little bit about stuff that you're working on and what your roles and responsibilities are at the brewery.
Yeah, well, I got into brewing in the mid-'80s. My first job was at a Manhattan Brewing Company, one of the first brew pubs in the country in New York City. I grew up in New Jersey. I have a brother who's also in the brewing industry. He was a big influence on me getting into brewing. I remember being a teenager and trying beers from all over the world, and I was just fascinated with the different tastes and styles and traditions. So about halfway through college, I decided I wanted to go into brewing. I was studying chemistry, so that's a good base degree, science. So I just did that and then got a job in Manhattan. And from there, have worked in various breweries. I was up in Boston at Commonwealth Brewery and Harpoon a little bit in their early days. Then I was over in Germany, studied over there, and worked at Paulaner there in Munich as like an apprenticeship. Then at the Lion Brewery in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Then just before Ommegang, I was with Anheuser-Busch based in Newark, New Jersey at that brewery for 12 years. And then I've been here in Ommegang since 2007.
Awesome. So definitely a wide range of breweries that you've had a chance to go experience for different types of scale, very big, very small.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where do you see Brewery Ommegang in that kind of realm? Obviously, you're part of the Duvel kind of group there, but where do you guys fit in your mind in terms of the big or small kind of area?
Well, we're still small relative to say Anheuser-Busch or whatever.
Of course,
regional size, but I feel fortunate I was able to work in all those different size and styles of breweries because it gave me a very broad perspective, and I had that benefit because my brother worked for Pabst and then Anheuser-Busch, so I always had that view, and I always wanted that experience to work for a company like that because the know-how in a brewery like that is really a lot of know-how, a lot of expertise. You learn from people with decades in the industry. So I loved my job at AB. I loved working there, but my heart was back in I started my career in small breweries. My heart was kind of back in a smaller brewery. So when this opportunity came up, I have another brother who's lived in this area since the 90s. So it was just a good fit. And then being owned by Duvel Marquette, that was just icing on the cake, being able to work with Duvel, but also that security of, very well-funded, established company, So
absolutely. You definitely get a lot from those experiences around your history, and that makes it just much easier to work on it when you're in that kind of perspective there. So that's pretty awesome. let's get into a little bit about some of the beers you guys make at Ommegang. I think everybody knows then the big ones out there, Rare Voss, and I've told this time and time again, Rare Voss was my actual entry to craft beer, believe it or not, which is kind of strange for being a very complex Belgian strong. But one of the things that I think that a lot of TV fans out there come to realize is you guys doing a lot of the Game of Thrones beers over the last couple of years, and we'll put some of those on the screen right here from pictures from some of the beers. How did this come together? I'm gonna be flaming in the comments, Phil, for this, but I'm not a Game of Thrones fan, so I've never seen a single episode. I know you're gonna kill me about that, but how did this come together?
I didn't know what it was either. Well, they approached us, the HBO, the producers of the show, approached us. They just like our beers and our symbolism, our griffin and stuff like that, very medieval. A lot of our branding had a very medieval feel, so they thought it would be a good fit. So it was very interesting. I would say in the beginning, it wasn't like everybody's like, oh, we got to go for this. There was some mixed emotions, but I think in the end, it turned out great. We produced some great beers. It was a very interesting way to develop beers because rather than just I or our innovation manager or someone like coming up with an idea, trying to emulate a style or a flavor, especially in the beginning, HBO was kind of they'd say like, well, we'd like this beer to kind of tie into this character or to this setting in the show. So it gave us different cues of, okay, well, how do we bring this character or traits of this character or this place? How do we bring that into formulating a beer? So it was very interesting way to do that. And I think we came out with some great beers. So, the show is over, obviously, but we plan possibly on bringing out specific beers that we did in like a gift pack, like we're doing 3 beers this year that'll be in a gift pack with a glass, I believe. So that's how that all came about.
Very, very cool. If you're joining us late, we're talking to Phil, who's a brewmaster over at Brewery Ommegang in Cooperstown, New York. If you have a question for Phil, you want to ask him about his history with beer or just something to do with Brewery Ommegang, use the comment on your platform, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. And we'll be sure to kind of put it up on the screen if we can and put him in the hot seat or whatever situation. Obviously,
it is literally hot today.
With the obviously with a lot of those beers that were produced, it's good to hear that they may be coming back because ultimately I wasn't a huge fan of the show, never really watched it, like I mentioned, but the beers I've definitely tried and they're really cool. Definitely interesting to hear about how you had to match the flavors and the styles with the characters with the themes. I think that it's really cool to have that kind of aspect with it. Did they give you a lot of control over the individual beer itself, or was this like they had an idea to begin with? Yeah,
well, I mean, in the beginning, we were pretty clear. It's like, you guys make the show, we make the beer. But they were involved on the level of like, well, we'd like it to tie in to Cersei, the queen, or to the North Wall or whatever. So they were giving us cues about what they wanted the beer to look like, taste like, kind of that kind of thing. And sometimes it like with like Valor do Harris is just like a straight up triple, like a Belgian triple, which we don't produce normally, oddly being a Belgian style brewery. But we thought like, okay, the cues they're giving us, like just a really nice triple would work perfect for that. Some other beers like Three-Eyed Raven or something like that were really different, weren't like traditional in that they had elements of traditional beers, but with other non-traditional elements, ingredients, and so forth.
Right. Very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's move into some new beers you guys are talking about. We just talked about this Pilsner that is relatively new, but let's talk about this new collaboration you're having with Big Dig Brewing, which I think it was released yesterday, if that's correct.
Big Ditch,
which is the Hell Superior beer. How did that come together, and why is this such a special beer?
Our innovation manager, Justin Forsyth, went to the American Brewers Guild, I believe, with Big Ditch's head brewer. And so that's how it. And they're based in Buffalo, so not too far from here. And so just thought it'd be a neat collaboration. It's Helles Superior, so it's loosely based on like a German Bavarian Helles style. Fermented with a lager strain, the same strain we use for the Idle Days Pils. But then kind of a twist on it. It's dry hopped. with some Hallertau Blanc, Mandarina Bavaria, and Citra. So
nice.
It has a really nice hop blend in the dry hop. It's not like juicy dank like a New England IPA. It's a little more refined aroma with the Hallertau Blanc is kind of like a white wine. Citra, of course, that's very fruity, tropical fruit, and a Mandarina Bavaria, which has a nice citrus aroma to it, but very nicely dry hopped. It's not overpowering at all. It blends well with the beer. It's a really nice, crisp, aromatic beer.
Awesome. Well, we got some great questions that are coming in already from the chat here. I love
questions.
There we go. So the first one's here. Is there any chance for more TV shows or movies you'd like to brew beer for?
Possibility, and never say never. Just nothing's come across our bow yet, but we'll see.
If there's more Lord of the Rings movies, I feel like you could fit right into that situation for sure. So let's go to another question here. This one's from Ian. It says, Phil, have you ever been to Ommegang Procession and Festival in the Grand Place of Brussels? Always a great evening.
No, I haven't been to the actual festival. So I've been to Belgium a number of times now. I usually go each year, but I haven't been to the actual festival. Something I'll have to do.
Absolutely. And one more here we got from Dan. So what style of beer inspired you to make a career of it?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say the traditional English ales and the traditional German beers. I remember getting a copy of Michael Jackson's World Guide to Beer or whatever. Is the old one. It was like a coffee top, that size, and just the beautiful pictures of these traditional breweries and brew houses in Europe that look like cathedrals, and it was just fascinating to me. And so I would say, the biggest thing was English and German styles.
Awesome. Sure. Well, if you're out there now and you're catching us a little bit late, we're talking to Phil, who is the brewmaster over at Ommegang, Brewery Ommegang in Cooperstown, New York. And if you have a question for him, make sure you use your chat panels there, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, and ask a question, and we can get that over to Phil. So moving on a little bit to more other stuff that you're doing at Ommegang here. One of the things that's interesting to me is your project cider pieces that you're doing. Talk us a little bit about what that is and why it was something that you guys wanted to go down that route.
Well, just something, we saw, we thought we needed to be competitive in different areas. We saw cider gaining some popularity. We're in the middle of upstate New York. It's kind of like ground zero for a lot of orchards and apples, apple orchards and so forth, and ciders. Right. So it's just something we started tinkering with. And then we teamed up with an orchard out near Cazenovia. The name is escaping me right now, but well-known orchard, and we have like a unique blend that they fresh press for us, then deliver the juice to us, and then we ferment with our house Belgian yeast strain, which it gives us some subtle spicy notes, phenolic notes to the cider. Very subtle. It's not overpowering at all, but it's very dry cider. Fermented to complete dryness. There's no residual sugar at all. We do a dry cider, then a rosé where we add hibiscus to give it a little bit of color and a little bit of fruity notes. And I just won a couple of bronze medals, both of those ciders at the great international cider competition, I think in Rochester. We took some of the cider and put it in bourbon barrels for about 2-3 months, and that came out really interesting. I was gonna say, we're just offering here, it's called Crimson and the Cooper. We have a blendery line of beers, very small volume, that we just offer here at the brewery. We're going to be coming out with a chai cider later this year. We're going to be doing like a chai tea blend in the cider. So just a way we felt we needed to, we were founded as like a real Belgian style brewery. Correct. And we came out with Nirvana IPA, and we don't need to just limit ourselves to Belgian styles. We have the know-how and expertise and equipment to brew other styles. And so cider was just an extension of that. So. And
is that related to more market trends like you mentioned? Well, we all about gluten-free and things of that nature.
competition got greater, there are a lot more breweries in the U.S. now than there were 10 years ago, and we see, okay, what's hot out there? What are people drinking? What are they buying? And we saw, cider coming up, and it felt right for us. We don't want to do something that just for the sake of it, to make money necessarily, but something that feels right for Ommegang, for our brand, for us. So like a traditional cider, dry cider, felt like a natural extension of beer.
Awesome. Well, we got some good questions that are coming in as well relating to this. This one's from Keith, and he says, love the barrel-aged double. What other barrel-aged beers do you have in the works? We talked about the cider obviously being barrel-aged, but are there any other things in the works on your side?
Yeah, well, we're just started canning and bottling some. We do barrel-aged 3 philosophers. We do 3 philosophers in bourbon barrels and wine barrels. We also have adoration. This is not new. We've done this 4 or 5 times now. Our Christmas Noel style beer that we put in bourbon barrels, that's in barrels now. That'll be coming out in the fall. Bourbon barrel vanilla smoked porter, which we've done a few times. We brew a smoked porter, then put that in bourbon barrels with vanilla beans. It's very popular on your Untapped ratings, I've noticed.
There we go.
Yeah, and then we do again in that range, barrel aged beers. We've done a couple of very small releases that are just available here. So we did a beer, Brewmaster's Grand Cru, which was kind of our 15th anniversary beer, which is like a Belgian strong dark that we put in a blend of tequila, port, and bourbon barrels. And that came out really interesting, but we can only get it here at the brewery.
Well, when COVID is gone, everyone come down to Cooperstown and
we have a beautiful tap house, great restaurant and everything.
I guess this is a good question to lead into as well in terms of people watching all over the world. Where's your distribution map of how far out you guys distribute in the United States, or how many states you guys go out to for people that are looking to find your beer?
We just entered Montana, so I don't know. We're like I think we're in about 48 states now. Okay. So we gain the distribution footprint of Duvel because and Duvel's over the whole country. So we're pretty widely available, but our biggest sales are right here in the Northeast, especially in New York City.
Awesome. Here's another question from Steven. Said, how do you come up with the names for your beers and ales? This is a common question we get asked a lot when we interview brewery masters. How does that process go to?
It just... it can be someone's singular idea, or it's usually a process. We have a whole innovation group that's multidisciplinary. I'm involved in it, marketing, sales, other production people, innovation people, and it's usually a process or something like that. It's something about the beer that sparks a name or so forth. Yeah, it's just a process, I would say, rather than it's usually not okay, this is it. It's like kind of work on it a little bit.
So basically, you all come together and you kind of decide from that perspective. And
I mean,
good to have that kind of
I'm not a big name guy. I worry about the actual what people drink. That's my main focus.
I gotcha. Here's another question from Eleanor. Where do you guys source your barrels from?
I usually get the barrels through brokers. Like Rocky Mountain Barrel or Kentucky Barrel. And I usually don't buy directly from distilleries. I source through brokers because they can find the freshest and so forth in range of shipping and all that. So, by and large, what we use are bourbon barrels. So they're pretty widely available because by law, bourbon distilleries can only use them once. So they use them once and then they go on the market. So they're pretty widely available, bourbon barrels.
Great. Let's shift to talking about, it seems like the thing we talk about all the time on these shows is the COVID response and things that's happening within your brewery itself. And I want to hear about what you guys are doing on your side. Obviously, we just talked before in the pre-show that talked a little bit about what you're doing, but give a perception of how COVID's impacted you and what you guys are doing to kind of fight back, for lack of a better word, get beer in hands of people.
Yeah, well, it really hit us pretty hard in the beginning because we're almost 50% draft, and overnight, just wholesalers were canceling their orders. So overnight, our draft went from almost 50% to 0%. But we're starting to see as areas slowly open up, we're starting to see those orders come back in. But we've been doing curbside. We don't deliver, but we've been doing curbside where people can order online and then come to the brewery, and we put their orders together and deliver to them in a safe manner. That's been doing really well. About 2 weeks ago, we're obviously in New York State. We're in phase 4. So we have, in addition to our tap house indoors, we have a large patio with a pavilion overhead. And that's been open about 2 weeks now with food. And, we have everything is socially distanced. You have to have a mask to come on site and all that. But I'm looking out at it now. It's pretty full, pretty, that's been doing well. So, and our volume just went up a little bit too, because we're doing a lot of limited releases now, some of these Game of Thrones beers and stuff. So you got to, stuff that you don't brew throughout the year at certain times, you've got to raise your production to brew those special one-time beers. So
awesome.
So
very cool. Well, we got some shout outs here. Obviously, they're coming through the chat as well. This one's from Mike, who says, cheers from Northern Virginia. I just popped open a Super Craig. Great beer. I look forward to finding more, especially those barrel-aged beers you've been talking about. Hope to check out Cooperstown one of these days. So thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, it's always cool to get these shout outs from people that are fans out there. And that's a long one. Mike, you covered half the screen with your comment there. Appreciate it. Very cool. Thanks, Mike. Ultimately, we've talked a little bit about a lot of things here in terms of, what you've been working on, what you have done in the past, but what does the future look like for Ommegang? It's a tough question to answer given everything that's going on with COVID, but what are some of the new things you guys are looking to do in this space, and to innovate yourself a little bit more in the future?
Yeah, well, that is a good question. We have this whole range of hazy IPAs, New England style IPAs, neon rainbows. So now we make a neon rainbows, which is a straight up normal hazy IPA. We just started releasing a neon lights, which is kind of a lower ABV, lower calorie version of that beer. I mean, this is stuff like 8 years ago. Nobody's brewing those styles then, but like, if someone asked me, would you be brewing a West Coast IPA? I'm like, probably not. But now it just, you got to branch out and produce like what people are looking for and so forth. So definitely that lineup of beers. The Pilsner, you're seeing people kind of coming back. I mean, all these styles are great, but like, sometimes at the end of the day, people just want a beer that tastes like a beer, like I don't want something that tastes like a cocktail. I want something that I taste the grain, I taste the noble hops, a little bit of the yeast. So we're hoping that the Pilsner has been gaining some traction. Hopefully that continues. We might not say we'd ever we would brew a seltzer, but something along those lines, like, but maybe a little bit more artisanal. Might be dabbling in that a little bit.
You raise a good point about the hard seltzers. We kind of talked to a lot of brewers about that. I'd love to hear your perception of this. Is this a fad? Is this going away? Is this something that's going to stay? What is your take on it?
It doesn't seem like a fad. I mean, I don't look at all the data out there, but I mean, just the growth of some of these like White Claw and Trulies and so forth. I mean, to me personally, they're not that interesting. It's not artisanal, really. It's not like having to brew a fine Pilsner or something like that. Right. But they are what they are. People, I can see why people like them. Lower calorie, lower ABV, kind of fruity flavors. But personally, they don't really interest me that much. But
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic. Talk to any brewer about it. Some of them say that they make it as just for something and they can't keep it on the shelf. Some of them said we're not doing that. It seems like you have your ciders, which kind of meet that kind of need from some people that are maybe gluten intolerant, for example, or trying to get into those kind of fruitier flavors. So you've gone down that route. It's interesting just to hear people's perspectives on where they think the industry is going in these areas here, because we've seen it on Untapped. Obviously, the data we see from check-ins from hard seltzers has increased significantly over the last 2 years, and just growing and growing and growing. And we're seeing the same trends with the New England IPA craze when that came out. So it's always interesting to hear topics about what people think about it.
Yeah, I mean, like like I say, it doesn't seem like a fad. So I think they're here to stay on one level or another. It's just, I'm a brewer, not a seltzer maker.
Yeah, I mean, it's speaking of which, in terms of the brewing process itself, you've obviously have a long list of experience and many other breweries that you mentioned earlier. We talked about what style got you into this career, but what style really excites you to brew every single day and keep that up there?
I love lager beers. I love pilsners, and the time I spent in Germany was just, some of those beers are sublime to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love those beers, but I love all the beer. I got into Belgian beers a little bit. I was exposed to and actually brewed, like my first brewing job, Manhattan Brewing Company. The head brewer was a man named Mark Whitty, and he was an Englishman who worked at Whitbreads and then Samuel Smith. So I was very exposed to those, real ales, cask conditioned ales.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, working at Paulaner and then Anheuser-Busch, exposed to lager beers and pilsners. So Belgian beers were kind of like later on the list for me. But once I got into them, I was fascinated by I tried the Duvel, of course, and then the Westmalle beers and all the different Trappist and some Abbey beers. And it's really some fascinating styles. So brewing that, though, I get excited about all the beers we brewed because we're brewing beer, and I like all the beers we make.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
We got another question that popped in here, which I think is a really good segue to probably our last topic. It's more about technology in beer. And this question is, where do you think technology will help the brewing in the future? We talked about Untapped being a source for this, but also this could relevant to other things like technology equipment for brewing beer a little better. What's your overall take from a brewer's perspective on technology in your brewery?
That's a good question. I mean, I haven't been totally up to date on all the newest technology, like some of the German brewing manufacturers have put out with different boil technologies to minimize hot time and minimize things like that. Cross flow filtration. At the end of the day, though, what makes good beer is just paying attention to the details, to the critical control points in the process. Mash pH, more pH, things like that, and paying attention to that, not necessarily the technology. You want to have the technology to make the processing consistent.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing what I did here was, like, when I came here, I was like, okay, how much are we aerating the wort? And it was like, oh, we open the valve to here. I'm like, no, how many cubic feet per minute are we putting into the wort to really regulate, to control the yeast growth, control the flavor? And that's something I was exposed at Anheuser-Busch, brewing in detail of that fine of a detail. And that's something I was able to bring into Ommegang. And so, like I say, I'm not totally up to date on all the new technologies. There's all these brew house technologies and different ways to louder wort. But at the end of the day, what makes good beer is good manufacturing processes and paying attention to details.
Absolutely. I think that, one of the things where we sit with Untapped, obviously from the marketing side of a brewery, I think a lot of that has changed over time within the just as technology improves. 10 years ago, people weren't, tweeting every single day, and now they are. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the marketing side that makes breweries think a little bit differently. But I agree with you in terms of when it comes down to the brewing process here, sure, there are things that make it a lot easier, but if you don't pay attention to the details, you will have a lesser product.
The equipment can't brew the beer for you, per se.
Exactly.
You still got to have someone who knows the fundamentals.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, thank you so much for joining us in this Sessionable Saturdays. Really appreciate your insights into Brewery Ommegang. We really thank you for all the information you gave us. Is there anything else you want to share with the community, where people can find you, websites, social media, things of that nature? People interested in finding more about you guys?
Yeah, just our website, ommegang.com. I would say, I think I mentioned before we went on the show, Untapped, I log into every morning. It's one of the first things I do. So I appreciate, the format, and I appreciate everybody giving their ratings, because it's like I take everybody's ratings to mind. It's kind of like a national taste panel in a sense. So it gives me an idea of how our beers, especially some of these new beers, how people are liking them or not, or, their comments. That's very valuable to me. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Phil. I really appreciate it. Want to give a quick update as well, and we'll just drop you down here, Phil, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I want to give you a quick update on what's happening with Untapped TV. Yeah, as the summertime is happening here, we're going to kind of pause the Sessionable Saturday shows and focus more on our virtual happy hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And coming up next week, we have an amazing group of shows for you. On Tuesday, we're going to be talking to Paul Shim, which is a beer photographer. You guys all know everything that's been happening out there on the interwebs of beer and photography, and Paul's going to talk a lot about how that sets it up, and you can follow him on Instagram and see all the great stuff he does. So check us out on Tuesday next week at 7 p.m. And on Thursday, we're going to be talking to Jeremy Danger, who is the at the Four Hands Brewing. You follow him on Twitter. You know who he is. He used to work at Boulevard. Now he's over at Four Hands. So amazing information about kind of the beer experience in Kansas City, and love to hear more about that from Jeremy. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or feedback, let us know at media@untapped.com or at untapped.tv. And if you want to catch up on previous shows we've done, you can also check us out at untapped.tv. And anywhere you listen to podcasts, you have the audio-only version for you to listen to. So cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Have a good one. Bye-bye.